Okay, this video is the top 20 novels and plays of all time. Well, first of all, the best one is Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. It's a great book and it's super short. It's like 100 pages. You can read it, on a weekend very easily. Number two is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Just a masterpiece. When the bishop forgives Jean Valjean and Jean Valjean turns his life around, becomes the greatest man in all of France. It's just a beautiful story. All of the movies are great. Oh, as far as Christmas Carol, I love the one with George C. Scott. I really love the one with Bill Murray, Scrooge. It's just great. It's just a masterpiece. Again, it's this sort of Christian theme of redemption, that a person can turn their life around and make it good, and they can become good. There's hope. Life has meaning. It's just beautiful. I mean, it's a reason why it's the best novel ever written. Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. And Victor Hugo is the French equivalent of Charles Dickens, is the English equivalent. And Fyodor Dostoevsky of Russia is the Russian equivalent. These are guys who wrote these masterpiece novels. And yeah, they all have a Christian theme, the top three novels. That's just what it is, because it resonates with human experience, the idea of redemption, of life as meaning and turning one's life around. They're magnificent. And the big thing to learn from Les Mis was the value of giving somebody a chance. Because Jean Valjean was a great man, and if the bishop hadn't forgiven him, that's it. He was screwed. He would have been in prison for life. In Brothers Karamazov, the big lesson to be learned was Alyosha was the best person. And Alyosha shows how a man should behave. He was good, he was nice, he was kind, he gave everybody the benefit of the doubt. He initially trained to be a monk, but then they sent him, Father Zosima sent him out in the real world to, have experience interacting with people. And it was just beautiful. And even his great genius brother, Ivan, was messed up because he was sort of become atheistic. And he wrote the chapter of the Grand Inquisitor, which is magnificent. It's the greatest book chapter ever written in any book. But he couldn't bounce out of his difficulties without faith in God. Atheism just ruins people. When life has no meaning, they sort of spiral down into alcoholism and other problems. I've seen tons of people go down the tubes with that. Okay, the next book is Gone with the Wind, and this is a new addition to this list. I'm just on the last audio CD of finishing it. It's 41 audio CDs. It's so good, I couldn't believe it. And, almost all the great books, they're written by men about men. So this was very unusual. It's written by a woman, Margaret Mitchell, about a woman, primarily Scarlett O'Hara. And Scarlett O'Hara is not that nice. I mean, she's fascinating, but she's not that nice. She's got all the bitchy, sneaky features of like the worst woman you'll ever date. So anyways, I'm not going to talk about it too much now because I'm going to go into this giant book review of it. But, for a man, I think all men should read that book because she's very honest about how women think. Like she needed money to pay the taxes on her house, so she's talking to this guy named Frank. And she says to herself, gosh, men are so conceited. Whatever you say to flatter them, they believe it. And once they have you flattering them, you can manipulate them into anything. So she manipulated Frank into marrying her, even though he was, sort of betrothed to her sister. And then she got the money from him to pay the taxes to save her farm, Tara. Anyways, I won't say any more about Gone with the Wind now, but it's magnificent. All men should read it. Women could read it too, and I know women will love it, but all guys should read it because it's great insight into how a woman really thinks when she's trying to, steal all your money. If I wish I'd known that before I got married, I would have been a lot better off. Okay, Quo Vadis by Henry Sienkiewicz. He's the Polish writer. And it sort of seems like there's almost like one great masterpiece from every country. And it's sort of the contrast between the early Christians and the Romans, how the Romans were just brutal, and in there's a character, a high-ranking Roman aristocrat, patrician named Petronius, and he sort of says, from the ancient Greeks, we learned about theater and poetry and literature and philosophy. He says, from the Romans, we learned about power. And from the Christians, we learned about forgiveness and love. And that's about right on a large scale. Jesus Christ was the one who brought forgiveness and love into human relationships on a big scale. He was the first one to do that. Almost all the earlier powers tended to be brutal rulers, with the exception of the Greeks. If you study history, you'll see that to be the truth. You can look at Edith Hamilton and her books about it. They're magnificent. The Greek Way, for example. So anyways, then another great books by the English guy, George Orwell, later on came along. Animal Farm in 1984 are masterpieces. And they were masterpieces of the idea of excessive control, of the early version of the Jeremy Bentham panopticon, and what that leads to, what that means. And he had a lot of experience in that from his personal life. And the guy was a genius, Orwell. Okay, the next one is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. And Aldous Huxley is the other side of excessive control, and it's a control by hedonism. And it's a large part of what's happening in the modern world. The way you can weaken people, like Will Durant, the great philosopher, said, all societies begin in Stoicism and they end in Epicureanism, where people become hedonistic wimps, and that's like the opioid crisis and all this other sort of laziness, superficial, short-term endeavors that people are sort of trapped up in. Okay, the next one was Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. That's about what happened in France with the atheistic French, in the 1790s. What a disaster that was. This really brings it home what really happened. It's brutal. And I studied a lot, but that's the best book. And what I've come to the conclusion is it's kind of a waste of time for students to study history in high school and even college without reading these books. I'm seeing that I learn more history from reading historical fiction than I do from reading historical nonfiction, because you almost need the sense of the people and the emotional issues of the time before you can remember the boring old dates and figures. You learn history best by stories about people. Okay, the next book would be Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, and that's really the best book about economics and recognizing BS. Ayn Rand was fantastic on those subjects. She's not as good on character development or on the emotions of the story, but in terms of like seeing what's really involved in socialism and the way games are played to take people's money away, she's great on that. You should also read the non-novel, just the Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Kiyosaki. That's very good on those subjects as well. Next, 10th greatest novel was Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. On the surface of it, it sounds like a children's story, but when you read the real book by him, there's nice bilingual versions too, from Italian to English. You read the real version, and I love the one illustrated by Roberto Innocenti. It's magnificent, and it's a great story. And there's all kinds of themes in there. Just like Aeneas carried his father out of burning Troy, Pinocchio goes into the depths of the ocean to save his father, Geppetto. And that's the idea of a young man saving his ancestry, his history of his civilization, of his people, of his culture, and then sharing it with the younger generation. So civilization has to be transmitted in that way. It's not, people aren't born with it. But it's a magnificent story. And the old Pinocchio movie was great. That was before, Disney became a piece of crap. But back in the old days, it was good. Okay, Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. Now, it's a dishonest book, but it's magnificently written. It's got a cliffhanger at the end of every chapter, and it's very entertaining. It sort of fizzles out at the end because he tries to, promote Robert Langdon. And Langdon, is kind of a weasel. I'm not even going to get into it more than that, but Da Vinci Code is fascinating. I read it in English, I read it in Spanish, I read it in Polish, I started reading it in French, but I ran out of time. I found the book very entertaining. And what's also great about it, was such a big bestseller that you could easily buy the bilingual versions, and you could buy, you could get it in both languages, and you could get all the audio CDs, and that made it great to study with for learning a language. Hamlet by Shakespeare, yeah, it's a play. I'm including novels and plays here. It's magnificent. I love The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. I like that better than The Portrait of Dorian Gray. What I liked about Oscar Wilde, I'm half Irish, my father's from Ireland, is how clever he was and the way he could, turn a phrase. He's got more entertaining quotes, I think, than just about anybody who ever lived. And I love the way he wrote with all his rhymes and his puns and his jokes and antithesis, and the way the phrase would turn back on itself, chiasma, the different rhetoric forms. It's very cleverly written, just magnificent. Oscar Wilde, in the end, he disappointed me. He abandoned his wife and kids and was an alcoholic idiot. But he was a magnificent writer when he was young. Sorrows of Young Werther. And the reason why I love this book by Goethe was the book itself is a little bit silly. Young Werther keeps writing letters to his friend Wilhelm to tell his friend how much he's in love with this girl named Charlotte. He loves the way she walks, the way she talks, the way she interacts with her siblings, the way she dresses, everything about her is so perfect. And then her boyfriend comes back to town like a couple years later, and she marries him instead of Werther, and Werther can't handle it. But what was great about it was, so Goethe was actually trying to show how Werther was a little bit nuts, but people took it the wrong way and admired Werther too much. But what did I like about Werther? Because I see so many people, I often teach study skills to college students and to medical students and the residents to pass their boards. And I notice a lot of people have a tough time. And one of the things I've seen that dramatically improves performance in academics is the idea of being in love with what you're studying. If you fall in love with biology the way Werther was in love with Charlotte, man, you'd be great at it. And I know that's sort of like what had happened to me when I decided I wanted to be a wildlife biologist, and I just got good at it because your brain is programmed to remember what you think is important. And if you think something's important and it's part of your future, you're going to remember it. Because like I had a typical experience. This is just recently, last week. The secretary tells me you got a biopsy on such and such a patient that day. So I got to know the patient's name because I have to write a note on them. I have to review their films before I do the biopsy, stuff like that. But then I got distracted. I had a whole bunch of other things to do for a couple hours. I was busy doing 5 different things. And then somebody said to me, "What about such and such, the patient's name?" And it's like, boop, I understood. I remembered it. I had made 0 attempt before that moment to remember it, but I remembered it because my brain knew it was important to know that biopsy name because I was going to have to do the patient, even though I made no effort whatsoever. So what I'm trying to say is, if you simply tell yourself this subject is important, your brain it's like telling your brain, remember everything related to the subject, and you'll be really way better at the subject. For example, a lot of people hated biochemistry. It's the most difficult subject in medical school because they think it's so difficult. But my attitude was biochemistry is the language of God that he uses to write the book of life, and to understand this well, one must really know biochemistry. So I was totally pumped up to do biochemistry, and I did great in the class, but I think it was in large part because I thought it was beautiful. I really liked it. Okay, next, Poland is the sort of historical fiction novel by James Michener about a family over a course of about 1,000 years in Poland and all the different big events that had happened through those years. Trinity is the equivalent historical fiction novel following Connor Larkin is the main hero of the book from the story of Ireland. And I've read tons of Irish history. My father's from Ireland. I talked to all the grandparents and uncles. They told me all the stories. But what I'm trying to say is these books are magnificent. I've read a whole bunch of histories of Ireland, but none of them stick even, a third as well as this book, Trinity, did. Okay, and the Poland, I read a lot about Poland, and that one stuck with me well, too. My wife was from Poland, okay, so I became very interested in Poland, tried to teach myself the Polish language. But that book was the best. It was a great book, okay? And I would read the book, and I would listen to it also, and it made it very entertaining. Next, Charlotte Simmons and A Man in Full by Tom Wolfe. Tom Wolfe was the greatest stylistic writer from the United States. He's got all kinds of clever punctuation, onomatopoeia, and use of rhetoric. So I would read him. He's a much more clever writer than Hemingway. Hemingway's kind of simple-minded in comparison to Wolfe. And Hemingway is sort of macho. I like Hemingway when he was young. He was a real heroic guy. I like that. But he doesn't leave any extra meaning with me, okay? He went to a bullfight. Whoop-de-doo, okay? But I learned a lot more from writing style from Tom Wolfe. So that's why I really like Tom Wolfe, okay? Charlotte Simmons, when she was in college, it was interesting how college kids behave. And again, a man writing from a woman's perspective was kind of entertaining. A Man in Full I liked too. That was an old macho guy. I liked him. All right, the next one, Alice in Wonderland Through the Looking Glass. Now, these books are a little bit silly, almost to the point of being stupid, but they're full of clever phrases and metaphors and puns and jokes that I find myself quoting them a lot. Even though when I was reading them, I thought they were a little silly, I still look back and found them helpful. I made videos about them. I made videos about a bunch of these books. Don Quixote by Miguel Cervantes, the plight of a good man doing the best he can, and how no matter what you do, there's a sense of the absurd in our lives. Smollett wrote good translations of it, so I like the Smollett translation. I listened to the audiobook version of that, and I found it very enjoyable. Don Quixote by Miguel Cervantes. Also, my mother's from Puerto Rico, so the Hispanics, man, they love Don Quixote. They name all kinds of stuff after him. Dunku rum is like super popular in Puerto Rico, for example. The book was a little bit too long. Gosh, it was like almost 1,000 pages. It could have been a lot shorter. The point was made early on in the book, but I liked it. Basically, Don Quixote, he decided he was going to do what he can to save civilization, even though it was kind of a hopeless. It was worth a try. So that was entertaining. Okay, the joke got a little old, but it was still a great book. Okay, Tristram Shandy. That book by Lawrence Stern was just funny. It was very, very clever. The joke of it was that it was sort of an autobiography, but almost everything he writes about happens before he was born. And the way he did it was very funny and clever. Again, it's another one of these books that goes on too long, kind of like Don Quixote. Nobody minded writing 600, 700 pages books back in those days, but it was still clever and funny. Ben-Hur was very good by Lew Wallace. And the gist of Lew Wallace was that he was a general from Indiana in the Civil War for the Northern Army, the Union, and he got blamed or disgraced at the Battle of Shiloh that he didn't arrive to the battle on time. And he says because his communication was ambiguous and confusing. And he was actually a real heroic guy. So I believe Wallace, but they had to blame it on somebody. They had such high casualties, so they blamed it on him, and he was pissed off. And he wanted to redeem himself. And he was studying a lot about religion, about Jesus Christus, and he decided to write a book about him. And it's sort of another book about early Christianity, in a sense analogous to Quo Vadis, but I actually prefer Quo Vadis. Quo Vadis is better. Plus the relationship between the Roman general Vinicius and Lygia, the barbarian princess, was magnificent in Quo Vadis, and the psychology of it was magnificent. But Ben-Hur was still a very good book. Actually, the movie Ben-Hur is better than the book. With Ben-Hur, the book, it starts out so slow. You got to read like 100 pages before it gets good, but then it does get quite good after that. And the movie was great, and the chariot race was great, and Charlton Heston was great. And the writing in the book actually then did pick up. It was actually, he had written 2 books and combined them into one. But anyways, be that as it may, the reason why I renewed this video was because Gone with the Wind got moved into the 4th spot because it was so magnificent, the book. I couldn't believe how great it was. One of my favorite books ever. So there it is. Hope it helps.